Hello, I'm a student of Bhikkhu Candana. This is just a reminder that he is a homeless monk, depending entirely on donations to live and share the Dhamma. If you want to help support Bhante, our teacher, please consider donating to this cause. Thank you and enjoy.
When we find ourselves in a corner, things that we had camouflaged, things that we had pushed aside, suppressed, colored, painted with attributes of a different or opposite qualities, as we are being pushed by the strenuous or strenuousness or the difficult imposing factors, suddenly those things that Lord Buddha calls anusayas, underlying tendencies, show up. This is a human, this is a normal phenomenon. Now that doesn't mean that we just push it aside and say, oh, well, that's normal, so I just accept it the way it is and leave it as it is. No, anusayas or underlying tendencies are there to inform us that these are still the things that we need to obviously understand, but nevertheless overcome. But you cannot overcome by pushing it down, by suppressing it, by negating it, which is what usually happens with practitioners. I'm addressing this question that was raised by a student. Many a time we have a tendency of neglecting our humanity, our history, where we have come from, what we have faced. And that means the interactions, the various emotional transactions, the upbringing, and the multitude of social, psychological, emotional vocabulary that we had to become accustomed to and negotiate this thing called life as we grew, as we are growing, as we are finding ourselves in the midst of different types of social situations. And of course, we are not living in the most simple of times. We're living in the opposite of that. Things are becoming more complex, more complicated, more difficult to negotiate. So one of the worst things that we can do is to point the finger at ourselves, or usually at others. But even when you're pointing it at yourself, what that generates is more of that tension. You know, that image I just shared with you, the being in a corner while you're being pushed. It's a very tight spot. It's a very uncomfortable place to be in. Now, it could be an actual corner. I mean, usually it is metaphorically used, but it doesn't make it any less intense. You might be pushed by the demands of life, of your role in a family, at a job site, in a career, in a relationship. But you also have other responsibilities, such as the time that you have. I would notice this when I would work. I was supposed to work only about 37 hours a week, around that. At least that's what they wanted us to put on paper at different agencies, for example. But we would end up, well, at least I did, as far as I know, end up putting in over 50 hours per week. My Saturdays and Sundays would be completely foreign as far as a weekend. I didn't know what that meant, weekend, because my week would not end. I had to do my notes and things like that. And you had to be meticulous. Meanwhile, you needed to pull away from that. Plus the responsibilities of having a body, having to feed yourself, having to exercise, to keep your sanity, to practice your meditation, to make sure you are, as they say, up to date with your with what's going on in your field. My field was psychology, therapy, etc. But what if you also had other responsibilities? Let's say you're married, or you have children that you have to take care of, or parents. So you see, now more and more factors are coming in there. It almost feels like, for many people, as if the ceiling is caving in on you. And if you're living in a big city, metropolitan city, where you have to drive to and back from work, let's say, now you're dealing with other extra added stressors, where, just like you, many others are on the road trying to get to where they're supposed to get to. But while they're also being squashed with the responsibilities or the demands that are placed on them, or they have placed on them. Doesn't really matter, because the body is now being squeezed from all sides. It almost looks like a toothpaste, or any type of a, something like a paste inside of a tube, and you squeeze it from all sides. Something's going to give. For some reason, we think that we are immune to natural laws, that we're supposed to handle it. Now, what happens in the field of meditation, or in this case, specifically in Dhamma circles, or those who are interested in the practice or are practicing to the best of their abilities the Dhamma, whether they are monastic or lay people, but especially, given that the question arose from lay students, the demands on lay people is quite tremendous. How do you deal with that? Because now that anusaya, or silent or dormant or latent tendencies, plural by the way, are creeping up. they're showing their ugly faces. And they will not do so unless there are pressures placed on us. Now, this happens because we usually like to think that we are doing good, especially when there are no pressures, when there are no stressors, when there are no, well, at least not that much or not that many demands placed upon us. So to live in a way where you are not confronting or being confronted with such requirements, responsibilities, demands placed on you, sometimes we think that we have it taken care of. We got this. Meanwhile, it's just almost like it's buying time until the conditions are ripe for them to show up, to show their ugly faces, if you will. Now, this is not necessarily something to be looked at as you're failing. This is what I want to address here, because oftentimes students will think that the very fact that this has shown up, this anger, when this person just pulled up in front of me on the road, all of a sudden I have this urge to, let's say, swear at them or yell, or all of a sudden there's a surge of, blood is rushing through I can feel it and pulsating throughout my body. My heart is beating fast. My breath is all of a sudden shallow, or I'm holding it in. What's going on? Now, instead of looking at that phenomenon as a thing that, in a sense, disclosed or revealed that, quote unquote, you have failed, because this is where the mind usually goes. Instead of doing any of that, maneuvering, which doesn't help in any way, instead of engaging in any such useless, futile things, the important thing is to drop into sati, bring in sati. The only way that I know, though, that I have come to understand through the suttas, and especially my practice, augmented by that, is to see that, what is the mind doing? So when it goes through these guilt trips, which, by the way, has everything to do with, remember earlier I was mentioning about the negotiations that we have learned, the different emotional, psychological vocabulary to deal with life, to look at ourselves in relation to the outside factors, the internal versus the external, and to find our place in that, we give ourselves certain roles, certain personas. And that has a lot to do with how people in our lives looked at us, saw us to be as, especially friends and family come into the picture here. How they view you, how they looked upon you, how important were you, what was the image that you presented for them, or the one that they stuck on you, labeled you with, and which you inevitably ended up becoming identified with. Now, decades might pass and you might have actually fought that if it was something derogatory, let's say, something detrimental to a healthy psychological upbringing. So you camouflage that with what? Many students of the Dhamma will come up with attributes that they have learned about, read about, or read up on in the suttas, let's say, qualities that Lord Buddha talks about. So we like to, and especially because you're putting in the effort, part of the mind will go and say, aha, I'm becoming more and more acclimated to this. And slowly, slowly, that thing starts drifting further and further away from our awareness. We might even come to think that they disappeared. And this happens a lot when people go to retreats or do intensives in very, very protected environments where everything is taken care of, where there is very little interaction with other human beings, and there aren't the necessary or added pressures that you would find in society, in a big society, big metropolitan city, which are not necessarily a good thing, to be surrounded by, so long as we're trying to really get to the bottom of things, meaning to disclose, to uncover the anusayas, the latent tendencies, the hidden tendencies. They're hidden for a reason, And if you've lived your life on this planet, chances are society has taught you that to be surrounded by those qualities is a bad thing. So the very fact that you're experiencing it usually, remember those labels that society and people around you have been giving you, this and that, and you've become identified with if they were good or even if they're bad, so you become very masochistic towards yourself. So you try to protect yourself by getting on all these different qualities that you want to attribute to this new you. It then, in this discipline, in this path, becomes detrimental for you to point the finger back at yourself and say, I must have been doing something wrong. You know what I deserve, or I basically finding yourself guilty. Now, what that does is it immediately creates even more agitation. Even more agitation. There's a sense of helplessness attached to this. That's why you were in the corner. Different demands, different difficulties, etc., stressors, pressures. What that means is you are not in control. If you're married or if you have a child, your child comes and says, Mommy, Mommy, Daddy, Daddy, this and that, and especially when they're growing up and they're turning into teenagers, really intense times, there's part of the brain that doesn't exist for them yet. Executive power doesn't exist. PFC doesn't exist. A sense of moral understanding doesn't exist as such. So what do? You're dealing with another human being, and they're your offspring. So what do? They become unidentifiable to you. They become disrespectful, this and that. And that's another totally different universe of pressures coming down at you. So what do? That doesn't mean that all those years that you raised that child, you did something wrong. No, not necessarily. If you really put your heart into it and you really were a good parent, please don't judge yourself. Because that's only going to add more agitation. Now, one of the terrible things that we do, however, is we bring in more remorse. Because at that moment we are disappointed in ourselves when we want to swear at that person who just cut us off on the road. Instead of engaging with that, look at that as it is. This is very important. As it is. And remember that you are also a bundle of biochemical, metabolic reactions taking place. In addition to that bundle or universe, you also have to negotiate, bring in, harmonize this orchestration of tendencies, psychological triggers, emotional triggers, social triggers, familial or relational triggers. So instead of running to the mountains, trying to avoid these things, the wiser person will sit with this and drop into the breath. Specifically, drop to the body, into the body, and see what's happening. If you're heaving, let's say, you will notice that. So what you did was you went back to something neutral. Instead of being caught in the cyclone or hurricane of, what am I feeling? Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. Oh, I'm breaking a sila. I'm no longer practicing my precepts. Oh, I'm terrible. What does that say about all these years that I've been studying the suttas or the teachings of Lord Buddha? I must have been a fraud. You see what's happening? More and more aggravation is taking place. And with that, you've even forgotten about that person who cut you off on the road, and now your anger has turned towards yourself. It probably was instigated by this external factor, but no longer is it there. It's actually multiplied so many times over. And now you are imploding. You are wanting to run away from anything to do with spiritual practice, in fact, because you want to go ahead and hide yourself in a cave, under a rock, because you feel terrible. All that self-righteousness, all these things, you start becoming disgusted with yourself. This happens to even the best among us at one point or another. But the key thing is to look at sati and the presence of awareness is not just awareness of the neutral or pleasurable experiences that you're having, the jhanic, quiet, beautiful states of mind, to be aware of those, or when you're not being triggered by anything. Anybody could do that. It's those intense moments on the night of Lord Buddha's awakening. People forget to consider how much of a hell he had to go through. All his anusayas came up. What he did with them, that is crucial. And prior to attaining Nibbana, or at the very least, prior to attaining a truly sublime state of calm, of understanding, deep, deep understanding, we have to go through this very dark side of ourselves. Otherwise, you're just wanting to have pleasurable, sweet, calm things to be happening where you're not having to deal with life. Nibbana doesn't happen through that through those, such scenarios, as far as I know. Everybody had to go through, whichever arahant we're talking about in the suttas, they had to endure facing, but what they did while they were enduring, while they were in that corner, what did they do different than what I'm doing now? Were they fanning the flames of anxiety? No, they weren't. The problem is that we look at the situation and we suppress it. And guess what that does? It creates more anxiety. Now, what do we do with that anxiety? We try to explain it logically, intellectually, by throwing certain terms at it, or explaining it away, or logically trying to tell ourselves, that driver who just crossed the road and cut me off, maybe he's rushing because he has a deadline. Okay, that might work. And it's a good technique to use at some point, but when you are fuming, when you are raging, already mad because of some other factors, guess what? Now you're going to have to fight with yourself because you're not acknowledging what's going on inside of you. So the acknowledgement has to be there. That's part of living honestly, being truthful to whatever is happening. So what is necessary here is the presence of sati, mindfulness, awareness, being present. Otherwise, you're going to keep on camouflaging anxiety, which, by the way, has turned into anger a mile away. It's already more and more anger. Layers upon layers of anger developing, and you're just sitting there and trying to explain it away. It's not going to work. So you must observe what is happening truthfully. That is number one. And then you need to develop compassion towards yourself. That's number two. Otherwise, your sati is going to be too dreadfully imposing in its weight. So now you have sati to deal with. That's no longer sati, by the way. So this is how the Dhamma can turn painful for some people, because they bring in the old stuff, the old ways of handling things, and they apply those same methodologies to the Dhamma, to be living the Dhamma. And they become their most dreaded teacher, their most fascist-like adult caretaker at one point in their past, or most toxic of partners in their past relationships, let's say. They become that to themselves. Now, how is that going to help? So that's why many people will go to the pub or to the bar afterwards to get to those so-called happy hours. It's just an escapism, which actually gets you to be 100% of the time intensifies whatever you were going through. It does not heal. It burns even more. It makes you become even more guilty. This Dhamma is different than other paths. When I was growing up in my teenage years, as I was pursuing my studies at the seminary to become a monk, Christian monk, I would look around me at the senior monks and whoever was there, the teachers and whatnot, people that I wanted to emulate, and then I would see them in their difficult times or things that didn't go as they wanted it, for something, they didn't get the right food or whatever it may be, something unanticipated showed up. All of a sudden they would become very difficult to be around. They were simply mean. Some of them would hit us, the younger ones. They would slap us. I would stay away. I would stay clear. Meanwhile, they're wearing the cross, they're so like. So I'm like, what is this, It's all suppression. It's all suppression. So these states are not necessarily to be negated at all. They are there to be understood, but you will not understand them unless you become a parent to yourself. One of the things that I constantly tell students, and I would tell this to patients in the past, in sessions. You must be your own father and mother. The father to protect, the mother to nurture, and vice versa. Because a mother can be also a protector. And the father can be equally nurturing. Equally. There were enough research done on that to prove that that is the case. So both parents are necessary in you. Even if your parents were major screw-up, okay? Stop using them as, well, that's why I am this way towards myself. I am impatient. I am heartless. I am too much of a disciplinarian. I am too strict with my... Enough of that. You are now an adult. You are growing up, and that's the way life is giving you another shot at getting a chance to really be under the protection of a loving, caring parent. Compliments of you. So, anusayas will come up. Every time they come up doesn't mean that they're going to wreak havoc. No. They will show up. But when they do show up, how is your relationship towards them? Can you look at them as a patient parent would to one of their, disobedient child? Because the child will relax at one point or another. I mean, eventually they're going to fall asleep, right? They might even be lovable at that moment. You might go and give them a hug carefully while they're asleep. But you need to have that softer touch with yourself. Otherwise, it's simply going to create remorse. And remorse will definitely create agitation. And when you have agitation, you are the farthest from Nibbana possible. It is impossible to attain any level of attainment while the heart is agitated. Forget about it. Same thing when you're practicing sila. Your heart should not be agitated when you're practicing sila. There needs to be calm. There needs to be contentment, at least afterwards, when the temptation is over and you have overcome those baser, we would say instincts in the past, but anusayas. You might have been fighting it, because depending on how you have dealt with similar situations, the anger might show up and you say, okay, if I am getting angry at you, well, at this person, I don't know who that person is, how they're looking at me like that, why they're looking at me like that. Maybe I'm reminding them of someone. Do they know who I am? Let's say they're a total stranger. They don't know anything about me. So how can I be mad at them? They are mad at me because they have lost control over their rational mind. So they're going by whatever my look, my voice, my height, let's say, triggered in them. I shared once how I was taking part in this 10-day retreat type of a thing. It wasn't just pure meditation, but it had all these encounter groups. So we were learning different tools and skills. This is happening, I think, back in early 90s. And one person, there were about 40, 50 of us, and we were in close proximity to each other. And so there were different groups taking place during the day, and everybody was there. You're seeing each other in different groups, and men and women. I was a layman, of course, at the time. And there was one particular person, a woman, who simply I could feel her anger towards me, and I didn't even know her name. I would just, and from the very start, I decided to pull away. I would just be very, very, I didn't feel safe around her, basically. And in one particular group, the organizers or whoever was running one particular group, they put us close to each other, and we were sitting in a position, face to face, and we were asked about our feelings, and I said, I don't feel safe. And I was already actually seeing how there was contempt in her face before I even said anything. And she was asked as to what's going on, and she said, I hate him. And I guess the individual who's running this, he was surprised that, but this was like a safe place, so we were allowed to speak what we were feeling, and he asked her, like, do you know each other? And she said, no, but I just don't like him. And the person asked me, how does that make you feel? And I said, exactly how you would think. Because I felt like this for the past several days, but I tried to, be even nicer in the beginning, but then I saw her and I felt her energy. I just pulled away, I said. And then she paused and she said, I've had in the past individuals in my life who were as big as him, and men, basically. And I was 6'5", I still am, I'm a big guy. And she was a smaller stature, physically a woman. But apparently my physical appearance triggered something in her that immediately put her in a state of mind which was normal for her. So I was that thorn on the side, basically. She didn't want me to exist. And it was this, in spite of her, that I was placed in that group. But eventually she realized the ridiculousness of her position. Especially because we had never met. I never done, and the person asked me, have you done anything to her? And I said, no, I don't think I have. And they asked her, and she said, no, he didn't do anything. So what I'm saying is, people don't know us. A total stranger especially, they don't know you on the street. They might flip you off, they might swear at you because you're at the wrong place at the wrong time, but they have something else going, a drama that's taking place in their mind. Now, instead of you immediately attributing that to yourself, or attributing that to yourself, just pull away and say, have I done anything? Because the remorseful mind doesn't care for that question. It immediately presumes that you must have done something. Just like the other person is doing this, and they cut you off, and so they did that intentionally. They're mean, therefore I need to crush them. That's what an angry mind is doing ultimately. And then we make stupid mistakes. So as practitioners especially, we need to look at what is happening in our own body. Your body, so long as you have this physical body, you will never be missing a teacher. Even if there's nobody else left on the face of the earth. You will never be without a teacher. So long as you have sati, so long as you have awareness. Sati sampajanya. carefully staying with full awareness what's going on, seeing. So the pressures of life are not supposed to go away so long as you're alive. That's the very first law, if you want to call it, or rule in biology. Not just biology, in physics as well. The stars, they come together. The nebula, they're squeezed tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. Similarly with biological forms. Life happens because of stress that's placed by the pressures around it. The seed is a perfect example. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a lesson to be learned. But so long as you're taking yourself too seriously and crystallizing or solidifying yourself an identity, and an identity for the other person who just cut in front of you on the road, you can always be creative enough in the opposite direction by saying, hey, come up with stories. Come up with stories. Oh, this guy must actually be, he's running for office, or he's running for a better job because he's not able to pay his rent. You can do that. But ultimately, you need to drop into your body. You might actually just give yourself some time by creating that story and just let it be, and then drop into your body and stay here. Stay here with yourself, because you need a neutral object, the breath, the heartbeat. If your fists if you develop, if you're holding on and your hands turn into a fist because of your anger, look away from the person who triggered this state and look at your fist. Look at the white knuckles that are forming in your hand, and just try to open one knuckle after the other, one finger uncoil, and look at them, the hand now. And you might be able to observe the blood going through the veins or pulsating, or just look at at your hand and your skin texture. All of a sudden, guess what? That's a neutral object. This also pulls you out of the remorseful mindset. This pulls you out of the emotionality baggages that you carried with you from childhood. And definitely it pulls you away from giving yourself new labels of put-downs, of derogatory terms that you hurl at yourself. Because how could you? How could you? You're supposed to be a meditator. Shame on you. If your teacher found out about this, so you should be ashamed of yourself. How is this helping, really? It's not. It's making you feel lousy. It's making you feel terrible. This is not Dhamma. Dhamma is peaceful. Santuti comes to mind. Contentment. It's peaceful. It's loving. Where's the protective father? Where's the nurturing mother in you? So, yes.